Welcome to More Creative. I'm your host, Ashley Wiley, and today we talk with Chris Bradley, a concept artist, illustrator, and art director. Throughout our conversation, Chris walks us through his early inspiration for starting a creative career, and the many roads that he had to take to get there. We hear about his transition from a field superintendent and project manager to an illustrator and art director for clients such as Universal Creative, Walt Disney, and 20th Century Fox. Chris also gives us some great insights into the world of themed entertainment design and some solid advice on how to know whether you should pursue your passions as a career. I hope you all enjoy this one. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'd like to start out where everything started. So tell me about when your passion and goals to be a concept designer and illustrator began.
As far back as I could remember, really, I was always drawing and painting and building little dioramas and stuff as a kid. But I think where it all sort of cemented for real was at Disneyland in Anaheim. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and so, every couple of years or whatever, my family would take a little road trip over to Anaheim and do the Disneyland thing. And I remember very early on one of those trips thinking to myself, like, oh, this is what adults can do, is you can spend your life being creative. And that was like a revelation to me, because when you're a kid, it's like it's all I want to be an astronaut or whatever, and I was no good at math. So this idea of like, oh man, you can actually spend your life being a creative person was huge. And so going there, right around that time when they started asking you like, what do you want to do with your life and whatnot. What I learned at that point, and then subsequently after that, road trips in high school and very early college, was that a place like Disneyland, and not exclusively Disneyland, but a place like Disneyland gives people a freedom to be more fun and relax a little bit and let their guard down and enjoy themselves a little bit. And I was instantly hooked on this idea that you could give people that gift by building stuff.
So when you decided to go to school, what was the program that you ultimately pursued to go on that career path?
So I stayed in my hometown. I didn't really have much of a choice. And I got a degree in illustration from the University of Arizona. And I was good, but not great, and certainly not good enough to come over to LA and start throwing elbows in the pool of professionals, right? It can be kind of cutthroat over here. So I was nowhere close to that. So I was designing websites for people, just sort of bouncing around after college, and I didn't really know how to direct myself. And I fell backwards into a construction management position. My friends, we'd all gotten some burgeoning careers and we'd all saved our money. Right when my friends were buying houses, I bailed. I took my money and I went to a little school in San Diego that does hardcore painting, drawing, and illustration training. So I basically went back to school to start over and get the skills I needed to compete.
So how long was it between your undergrad and then pursuing art school?
It was 5 years. It was 2003 to 2008.
So did you have to keep your portfolio up to date throughout that entire time to apply?
Yeah, I was running construction sites during the day and then going to figure drawing class every week and just trying to draw every day. Just for no other reason than to like keep the dream alive. Because here I am running these construction sites, and I learned a lot and I was pretty good at it, but I also felt like I had no business being there, or a kid with an art degree. So at home every night I was drawing something, just trying to continue being an artist, because that's how I sort of identified myself to the world. But this little school that will take anybody off the street and as long as they work hard can make them into something was really appealing.
So upon graduation from that school, what was your next step?
When I got done with that, I had started working as a fantasy illustrator in the trading card games. The big names in that are, Magic cards. And at the time, I think Blizzard was doing stuff for World of Warcraft. But that's kind of where I cut my teeth as a professional.
As an illustrator, what skills do you use within your career the most? Doing something like creating fantasy art? Do you use painting? Do you use computer software?
For me, it's Photoshop. Everything I do is digital paintings. That job has become more and more a mix of being a 3D artist and a 2D artist. But my other roles as, concept artist and art director and stuff, you use all kinds of stuff from napkin sketches all the way through. You use whatever tools are at your disposal. And sometimes it's about getting the idea on the board the quickest.
Going from your first career out of art school, what were your goals at that time? Where did you want to move from there?
So my goal was always theme park design. Theme park design for Disney, but as you're sort of familiarizing yourself with the industry, you learn how many other options there are out there for those skills. So for me, it was about figuring out how to get from fantasy illustration over to designing parks and location-based entertainment or immersive experiences or anything sort of within the genre. And I got really lucky on that. I ended up going to, I think it was the first GibGab that the TEA had. So that was a speed networking event to introduce the young people in the industry to the companies that were in the industry. So you had 3 minutes at each table with each company to sort of show what you do and introduce yourself. And to be honest with you, I didn't have a clear path from where I was in San Diego, making paintings in my house to theme parks. But I saw that this event was happening, and it was at 1401 Flower Street, and there was a lot of people that were really green, either still in school or fresh out of school. And I had the advantage of being a little bit older and a little bit more seasoned. And I knew, being in the commercial construction sort of world, I sort of had a better idea of how business is done, what people want to talk about when we're in a professional setting and stuff like that. So I kind of had a leg up on the competition, in that I was a gray-haired old man amongst the next-gen kids that were coming through. But my portfolio was well received, and there were a handful of places that needed more artwork. It was a really good time in the industry for an artist to join who could execute a competent illustration. And so I got really lucky and made a number of contacts out of that and got a full-time job eventually from it. And I got my first Disney job from that meeting as well. It's like it all happened in one day. It took years and years to build it and went from sort of 0 to 60 real fast. And timing is everything. And I just got lucky hitting it at the exact right time, when people needed exactly what I was selling. But also, it was taking a shot in the dark. I could have driven all the way up from San Diego to Glendale, gone inside this building that to me is like a magic factory, have everybody shoot me down, and then I have to get escorted out because I snuck out and went into the wrong spot. Like, it could have been a total disaster.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, and I'm incredibly lucky that worked out that day in my favor. I have yet to actually work inside the Magic Factory. All of my work with them is as a contractor.
Oh, interesting.
So when I go over there to have a meeting or whatever, I go in, I get a little bit of what is going on. I get up to speed on what the project is or whatever, and then I go home and make the paintings or make the storyboards or the artwork, to go with whatever it is that they're working on. And then sometimes there's a follow-up meeting, but sometimes it's almost entirely done, through email and phone calls. I think you've probably spent more time inside the Magic Factory than I have from your time over there. So for me, it's still got a little bit of a mystery to it. I know I would get lost. Like I don't know it well enough, right? Like if they left me unattended,
it is very confusing.
Yeah, if they leave me unattended for very long in there, I get completely like turned around and I don't know where I am. But for the most part, my role with them is completely outside of the ecosystem over there.
Awesome. So going from your commercial construction background, how different was it transitioning from leading teams on commercial projects to leading yourself and other teams as an art director or concept designer?
It's not as different as you might think. When I have to do a project that's entirely by myself, it's usually an illustration project. And so I rely on the skills and training that I built in school to sort of make this thing happen without having to have somebody looking over my shoulder all the time. But when I do have an in-house job, most recently I was working at the Hedema Group and other outside projects where I get to lead a team. It's quite a bit different. When you're leading a team, you would think that like trying to get the electrician to show up and the carpet guy to lay the carpet when you need them to, and for those two to coordinate so that they're not mad at each other, is miles away from directing artists. But it's really not. The golden rule of management is that if you get to know people a little bit, they'll tell you how they like to work. So all you have to do is talk to people a little bit and be a good listener, and they'll reveal to you exactly how they want to interact with you. And so if you take those principles and reapply them, you can reapply them to pretty much any field. But reapplying them to artists, not that difficult, So just being a good listener and talking to people. I went to a convention, I think it was Comic-Con, but it could have been one of the others. And I talked with Marcello Vignali, who was a longtime Imagineering veteran, but at that time he was one of the art directors at Sony Animation. And I asked him about art directing and how do you do it. He told me, and I'll paraphrase, but he told me this story. He basically said, if you take a team of designers, they could be the best designers in the world, right? But if you set up the team dynamic as you're the director and you have all the answers, the best designers in the world will just wait for you to answer the question. They'll just defer to you. But if you set up the team dynamics such that you don't have the answers and the group has to come up with the answers, and each person is empowered to maximize their strengths and contribute their strengths, the end product is so much better than what you could have come up with if you just had to think of it all on your own. And so that's the kind of teams I like to build. That's the kind of teams I like to be on when I'm not in a leadership position. And that really fits with sort of how I think these things should be run to their maximum effect.
It sounds like your past work as a project manager was basically the perfect transition into your role as an art director. I mean, so many things overlap. It's really fascinating to hear the similarities.
Yeah, yes and no, I would say. In one regard, there's a lot of training I've had from outside of this industry that I'm able to apply to what we're doing. A drawback to it is that when I walk into a place and introduce myself and tell them, and show them the artwork and say, this is what I can contribute to your project, and this is how I think through problems, and this is what I like to do. Also, I used to run construction sites. I used to be a project manager, a field superintendent, and a producer all in one, which was the version of the job I had. Most people don't know what to do with that. It's such a rare combination of skills.
Absolutely.
Right? So they inherently don't believe me.
Really?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that they inherently don't believe, because these jobs are all fit for different personality types, right? And so they don't believe it when the artist is like, oh yeah, I used to be a project manager or producer or superintendent.
It's like the perfect combination.
I know. So people have to sort of learn that I'm not lying. And also, I do have to caveat this a little bit in that, I'm never the one that you want to trust with the spreadsheets. Like
Sure.
That part of the job I was not super great at. I was good enough to get by and not make a huge mess, but like people that are really good project managers in our industry, and I've worked with a handful of them, that is so far beyond what I was achieving in that role.
So, aside from Disney, you've also had the opportunity to work with a lot of major companies like Universal or 20th Century Fox. So, how do you get hired to work with a variety of different companies from a contractor position?
So one of the many ways to work on these projects, one of the many ways is to work for the
Mm-hmm.
smaller design firms. The big guys, they love to tell the world that they have this, creative stable of geniuses that are dreaming up everything, and it's a secret, and you're not supposed to know about it, and we're going to let you in on the secret. And that's true. They do that, but they don't do everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the pressures of corporate America to not have huge payrolls are real, especially for the bigger companies. So a lot of times this work is done by smaller studios, or the smaller studios sort of supplement what the in-house team can do. I have found that you can go to work for a small studio and suddenly find yourself on something that's kind of a big deal. And the same rules apply. We're not supposed to talk about it. We're not supposed to, we can't really divulge anything
Sure.
or whatever. But yeah, when the smaller places call, if you're a huge Universal fan, and the smaller places call, and you are inherently like turning your nose up at it because it's not Universal, it's not Disney, or it's not Fox or any of the others, you're doing a great disservice, because you may find yourself on a Disney project, just not at Disney, or you may find yourself on any project. It's certainly not exclusive to them. So to me, that's been a really great way to get in and work with those companies.
That's great advice. I know one of the biggest realizations I came to when I worked at Disney was the amount of work that was contracted out. And it makes perfect sense. I mean, you can't have everybody in-house, but it's just
Right.
something you don't think about.
Yeah. And they don't want you to think about that. And fair enough. But let's take, for example, Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge. There are a lot of people that worked on that. Tons and tons of people that worked on that. So if you can be a smaller company and execute something super cool, but then maintain your own culture, that's a totally valid thing to do.
Absolutely. Along with working at any company, really, very often you also have to work with intellectual property or IP. So, how is it working with stuff like that? I mean, does it create a challenge with your creativity? How is that process?
I'm usually relieved by it, to be honest, because you're already so far ahead with the fact that NEP has had the work put in and the millions of dollars spent developing it to get it to whatever it was originally, right? So if it's a movie property, that's had 1, 2, maybe 3 movies out already, there is a of work that has already been done that you just build off of. Sort of a standard in our industry is like a 13-week concept package. You got 13 weeks to go from the starting gun to a concept package, and to have that be reviewed. And they don't add weeks if you don't have an IP, right? Right. So like sometimes if you don't have an IP, you have to invent the IP and the land and the rides and all the stuff. You have to do all of that in that same time. Whereas if you're handed something that somebody's already spent a ton of money developing, then you can dig in and add to that world in that same amount of time, and that can be a lot of fun.
When you do work with intellectual property, Do you have the opportunity to work with people that have worked on this specific thing for a duration of time so they know about it and they can get you up to speed? Or is it you having to go in and do the research before you get started?
The true answer to that question, and a lot of questions, are it depends on the project. Sometimes you have to just sit down and Google the word. Like the ones that are ubiquitous, we all know, we all have a starting point. But maybe some of the ones that we're not terribly familiar with, you got to educate yourself. I have found that around the time that I'm brought in on whatever project, there's usually been a writer or creative director who's been there for a little bit longer, who's been on that project for maybe a couple weeks or a couple months. And they've usually become an expert in the IP at that point. So somebody, usually the writer, has done a deep dive on the IP and becomes the local expert on it. Sometimes you'll get people that worked on it originally, but usually by the time a theme park project is coming along, the team that did the IP development the first time has been either disbanded or moved on to whatever the movie studio is developing now. And so they don't usually go over and help out the theme park effort. You'd be surprised how much of the theme park stuff that you're familiar with has been designed using screenshots from the movies and the art of books, because there isn't a lot of synergy between the different divisions of these companies, and that seems to be real common throughout the entertainment industry. Maybe you can have the opportunity to take their brand and add to it. I think that's the most appealing part of working with IPs, is the ability to add to a existing story.
Have you ever gotten to work with a specific IP that you were really excited about? Maybe one that you'd enjoyed during your childhood?
Well, yeah. My first job at Imagineering was on something that involved the Pirates of the Caribbean. And it's not something that happened. It got shelved. And that's about all I'm allowed to say on it.
Sure, of course.
But, Pirates of the Caribbean was the coolest thing in the world to me as a kid. Still is, quite frankly. I love that ride. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to just sort of like all of a sudden, I'm painting some pictures for that IP that was like, whoa, that's amazing. But there's a lot of it that I haven't gotten to touch yet. I'd love to do something with the Muppets, and I'd love to do something for Disneyland. Since I consider that my home base, I haven't had a chance to do that yet. But hopefully we're speaking that into existence, and that all comes to pass. But even if it doesn't, I think one of the things that's really fun is that if you get a project or an intellectual property, or even inventing something completely new that you're not familiar with, if you get to play around in a world that you don't know, that can be a lot of fun too.
Cool. So, what would you say your favorite part of your job is?
My favorite part, I think, has got to be the people I work with. For the most part, I would say the people you work with. If you find yourself on a team that has some really good people on it, the day-to-day of working with cool people makes life so much more interesting and fun. That part of it is really cool. I also really like the part towards the end where we have put in this massive amount of work, and when it's all collected together, and you can either flip through it on the screen, or you can literally page through the concept package, and you can see everything in one place and realize how much work everybody put into it. That part is really fun. Again, most of these projects that we do, they for whatever reason, they don't go anywhere, or they go somewhere and then don't come out for years. So if you're banking on, like, I'll be happy the day this opens, and you're in concept, it might be a while, it may be never, right? But if you are saying to yourself, like, I want to see all of my work in the context of everybody else's work in one spot, then you get a payoff that happens quite a bit more frequently than every time a project is open. So yeah, I would say those are the two parts of the job I like the most.
Awesome. So on the flip side, what would you say the biggest challenge is?
For me, the biggest challenge is like the execution of the types of like finished marketing paintings that I get to make can be kind of harrowing. As an illustrator, you don't necessarily have all the tools that you're normally used to working with. And unfortunately, like the art that resonates the most is the stuff that can be read from the back of the room, like the clear, beautiful paintings. But you have to remind yourself that what you're making, in addition to trying to be the most beautiful piece of concept art you can make, is also like a visual spreadsheet that is going to be an illustration for a presentation, right? So this is just part of somebody else's bigger thing. And you have to do the best you can without ruining what somebody else is planning on doing with it. Because even the artwork it may be finished for me, right? But it's not a finished product for our industry. So you kind of have to remember that it's a cog in the machine.
So do you feel like that inhibits creativity in any way, or is it something kind of like the IP that can help guide you in a certain direction?
I think ultimately you're working in service of a bigger idea. So as long as you've said out loud to somebody, this piece would look a lot better if we took the following things out, right, and simplified, and then they say, well, we have to keep them in for the following reason. Or you say, maybe we should shrink that thing, or maybe we should make this thing bigger. Whatever it is you have to do to service the like composition of a beautiful painting, as long as you said it out loud and found either that they'll let you change it, which sometimes happens, or that they're fine with it because of reasons for whatever happens in the next steps, then you could take comfort in the fact that you've done the best that you can do and you're contributing to the process and they're happy with it, so you move on.
So at this point in your career, what are your goals?
Well, the main goal is going to be to get everybody back to work, right? This COVID-19 is just kicking our butts right now. We were, as an industry, I think, running full speed all the way into January, early February, and then every month since then has really sort of slowed us down. So getting back to work and getting everybody back up and running, I think, is the preeminent goal that all of us sort of share right now.
Fair enough.
Beyond that, I would like to continue working on cool stuff with cool people. The thing that I know now that I didn't know before I got into the industry was how much more important it is to be on a good team than it is to be on a cool project. I think one of the things that happens is you think that the biggest, coolest, most high-profile projects are where you want to be. And maybe that's true. Maybe everybody needs to strive for that in their career and really push to make that happen. But the thing that you don't realize from the outside coming in is that the people you work with and your ability to click with them really matters. Because there are hard days in this industry. Like, I don't think anybody thinks that our job is just to like coast along and have fun enjoying the magic. The magic is for the guests, right? So there are hard days, and there are decisions made along the way that you're not going to agree with, and there are tasks that have to be done that you don't want to do, that nobody finds fun. It is a job, and they have to pay us to do it. But if you are with people that you enjoy being with, and people that you know how to communicate with, and people who know how to communicate with you, life is so much better.
Well said.
Thank you.
So, at the end of every podcast, I like to ask a couple of the same questions. They're a little bit more lighthearted. But the first is, what profession, other than the one you currently have, would you like to pursue if you were living like a second life?
Well, I would like to restore or flip old houses.
Nice. That's
yeah.
my wheelhouse.
Oh yeah. I think that there's a level of creative freedom there, and you're building a nice space. And if you've got good a good palette to work with, you can do sort of the same things that we do. If you're working on a house that's like a mid-century modern house, you can sort of dive into the mid-century modern aesthetic and swim around in it for a while, or Craftsman, or any of the styles. You can buy a generic box and make something cool out of it as an artist. I think that's a world that has a lot of overlaps to what we do, and so I think that might be fun.
Absolutely. That's a great one. Okay, so the last question is, if there is any advice that you have on turning your passions into a career, what would that be?
That's a whole other podcast.
Yep.
Quite honestly.
Last question. Let's start over.
With an hour left to go. Okay, so I'm very passionate about this topic. So if you ever decide to do a whole episode, call me. So let's use theme parks as an example, but I think that the sort of way I think about this applies to whatever. The first step people should do is figure out exactly why they like something. Why are you passionate about something? Why are you passionate about theme parks? Figure out, like, down to the granular detail, what it is about your passion that you love the most. And then I would suggest that you switch gears a little bit and think long and hard about what it is that you are good at and what it is that you can do for 40 to 60 hours a week. Because that's what you're going to do it a lot. And so if you hate it or you're not very good at it, that can be miserable. That can be real miserable. So know yourself. I can sit and paint all day long, right? Other people can sit and do spreadsheets all day long or whatever, right? So figure it out and then overlay those two sort of thoughts together and see where on like the Venn diagram they overlap, right? And if more than one person on the planet has that job, then it's a worthwhile endeavor, right? It's absolutely worth diving in. If it turns out that there's a whole segment of the population that does that thing that you've just identified, where you are both good at it and capable of doing it for a long period of time, and you're enthusiastic about it. But if they don't really overlap, or maybe they do overlap and one guy has that job and there's nobody else that has that job, then I would say be okay with letting your passion stay your passion and generating your income from something else. Be okay with the idea that they don't necessarily overlap. And you may find that you have a lot more fun being a fan and being passionate and expressing it to other people in that way than you would if you tried to find a job behind the scenes. Like I said earlier, the magic is for the guest. And as cool as theme park design firms are, they're not as cool as going to a theme park.
Fair. Yep.
Right? Like the show that they put on at a theme park is so much more fabulous than the day-to-day of designing a theme park. It's a job. I'm not saying that there's cool stuff. There's plenty of cool stuff that happens. But don't believe social media. Like the people that post a lot about how cool and how great their job is, they have bad days too. Sometimes they post because they're having a bad day and they need some reassurance, right? Right. So, I would say disavow yourself of the assumption that the grass is greener, because it isn't necessarily. And there are plenty of ways to get very involved in your passion and keep your day job, and that's okay. I'm not saying don't try.
Yeah, of course.
Like, see if you can figure it out. I mean, a lot of worlds have a lot of roles that you don't really know about. So you may find that there's a quiet way to get involved with your particular expertise, but it's okay if you don't. You are allowed to just happily and enjoy it throughout the course of your life. But if there's an opportunity, take it. Jump in.
That is excellent advice. So, Chris, thank you so much. This conversation was so much fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for listening to me.
Absolutely.
I can be kind of wordy, so I appreciate the patience.
Of course.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Chris or his work, you can visit his website listed in the show notes down below, or find him on Instagram at Bradley's Work. If you guys like the show, please subscribe, leave a rating, and comment on whatever platform you listen on. It really helps out the show. For more information or to learn about future guests, you can also find us on Instagram at TheMoreCreative or on YouTube at More Creative. Again, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time.